There we go, recording. Hey guys, not Mishka here. So I've been making a lot of tanking tutorials on the dungeon bosses lately. And in-game, I've been being asked a lot to, just like Sloth, how do you hold aggro? Sloth, how do how do I not get pulled off of during dungeons, or what am I doing wrong? This is the video. This is the guy. So this is just gonna be going over aggro holding in dungeon scenarios. First things first is affixes. Your hammer's affix is going to be one of the main helpers in you holding aggro. As per hammer affixes, you want to be treating a hammer as if it were, I can get the thing to center, there we go. You want to be treating it as if it were a damage weapon, if it were a mage wand, a scoundrel gun, ranger, shaman, etc. Damage affixes are going to help you hold better aggro because Paladin's aggro generation is on a damage multiplier. So the more damage you're doing, the more aggro you're generating. So, like me, I run Bleed Giant Killer. Bleed Giant Killer has always worked out for me, even when I haven't been using a +7, all the way back when I had like a +5 and a +6. Bleed Giant Killer has just always been the crutch. And Charge Strikes also works out really well too. Ice Heart as well. If you're going to be running always with a Frost Mage or someone who frosts regularly. If you're not running with a rotation Frostfire or Frost Mage, you are losing out on Ice Heart buff. So if I can proc for me, for my loadout right now, if I can proc a bleed stack, that's really helpful for my aggro, especially if it's on a charged hit. If it's not on a charged hit, it still helps, but not as much as that charged hit would. Plus Giant Killer. Giant Killer, I get a 3% damage buff on any boss enemy I fight. So any enemy that has that little gray tag up there next to the circle. Granted, Giant Killer doesn't work on stuff like those, like dungeon trash enemies. But that's not really important. Holding aggro on those isn't hard, especially since they die so quickly. Even if you get aggro pulled off of you, if they're like below half health, then it's fine. It's fine. It'll probably die before it reaches whatever DPS pulled off. As for bosses, though, it's not exactly the same. So, just to summarize that, Hammer is essentially the same as a damage weapon. So, Bleed, Giant Killer, and Charge Strikes are like your 3 go-to for a hammer affixes. For a legendary hammer, any combination of those 3 work. Bleed Giant Killer, Bleed Charge Strikes, or Giant Killer Charge Strikes. Ice Heart if, those exceptions apply to you. Now, a common thing, sticking with affixes, that a lot of tanks preach by is unbending. What unbending is when an enemy is about to kill you, it's about to drop your health to 0, it takes your health, and instead of putting it at 0, puts you at 1. Now granted, it's good for some scenarios, like obviously I had this unbending hammer in my inventory, but that's just for tanking this guy right here, this little sumbitch. I'll give it that unbending is really cool in some scenarios, but day-to-day dungeon tanking is not one of them. Unbending can be avoided with just basically skill, good timing, good execution, and if you're running with a healer, a good healer. So, moving on. Aggro generation. This is what's going to help you maintain aggro. Pips. Pips are going to be your main form of damage. A pip will take a 48 hit and turn it into an 11k hit, where that damage multiplier affects it. The damage multiplier for a normal hit is 4 times the amount. So that 11k hit there, I just generated 44k aggro, and it would take a DPS doing more than 44k to pull off me. So say a mage hits like a 20k fireball. It would take 3 fireballs for that mage to pull off me if I just dumped one hit into him. Which you never want to be doing that, dude. You want to be dumping multiple hits and multiple sets of pips on a dump. Now, one of your main helpers in this department is your Empower book, which is the book on the far right, the one with this green meteor and pink background. The Empower book takes the aggro generation and boosts it up insane amount. So it takes this 11k hit that would have generated 44k aggro, and it adds 170k to it. Even though that was only a 24k hit, since so it gives you this buff, right? This little buff here. And even though that only was a 24k hit, since I used up the Empower book buff on that hit, that generated 170k on top of that, just 170k. So the way you gain a ton of aggro quickly is by doing what I like to call an aggro lock, and this is how you would start off every boss fight, like in the game, with the exception of, I think, 2 of them. 3 of them, I lied. No, 2 of them, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know, whatever. So you start off out of combat with 5 pips and 2 charges. This is referred to as going in with 7 pips, where you have 5 and 2. Pull your aggro book, or your Empower book, and you just dump it. Mid-dump, you charge your hammer, and keep dumping. You don't want that pause. I just paused to show you that I was charging my hammer. But in a real fight scenario, you want to do that quickly. You want to get that done with as fast as possible. Because, look, real quickly, I'm going to show you how to actually do it with, the speed. And I'm not going to pause to show you the charge. It's just going to mesh in with everything else that I'm doing. Like that. That big stream of red numbers is what you want. Other than that, a really common mistake I see a lot of new tanks making is ground slamming during a fight. Now, ground slamming is good for ad groups, for these little men back here. During boss fights, not so much. A ground slam is a 3-pip hit, and it's just done by slamming into the ground. Like that. It didn't animate because Orbis be buggy, but like this, hopefully. Yeah, like that. It used up 3 hits. And a ground slam generates 66k aggro, which is good for enemies. Well, 66k on a 17k hit. So that multiplier being diminished for however many damage you do. So it generates 66k, which is good for fighting multiple melees at once. For fighting bosses, not so good. See, the 3 pips that it would have costed to generate 66k worth of aggro, dumped as a melee hit, would generate like 240k. Granted, all of those hits do... Wait. No, I lied. 180k. 180k. Granted, you dump them all as melee, assuming that each hit did around 10k, 30. No, 120. 20, yeah, 120. 30k times a 4 times multiplier, 120. So you've nearly doubled your aggro generation just by not ground slamming. Other than that, another really big problem is stun locking. 7k is what the thing says, but that was it. Alright, yeah, 7k for a non-crit stun lock generates roughly around 30k aggro, which isn't bad. It's 10k less than what you would be generating with a normal hit, but doing too many stuns during a fight is just enough for a DPS to catch over you and pull aggro off of you. So you don't want to be stunning unless, worst case scenario, you're about to die, you don't have any sort of heals, your healer isn't healing you or calls out that they have nothing, then you stun. Unless you're doing a rotation boss, like Mistkeeper, where you have to stun throughout poison phase. or a downtime boss like Dobergovin or Dungeon Troll, where their uptime is so minimum that you can stun during it and back off during their down phase without losing aggro because you're resetting the aggro every time they're coming up. Now, probably gonna stop this recording, head over to a dungeon, and just show you that while I'm being damaged, so you can sort of see the pip generation in combat. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Alright, recording's working. If you're watching this, I figured out how to edit the videos together. Yeah. So, I just went from player house to a dungeon. This is Scav Shaman, the last dungeon in Abandoned Mines, or the last boss in Abandoned Mines. I chose this dungeon just because it's scaled to 30. If I had chosen one of the high step dungeons, it would have scaled down and he wouldn't have hit as hard. This man will hit a bit harder, so you'll be able to see the pip generation on higher level content versus just leveling and, dungeon queue. So, going in to a fight, on this boss you're going to have to pally throw in because his proximity aggro is really close and you'd be losing out as he's running towards you. So you're going to see I'm going to throw my hammer in there after I pull right book, teleport over using the trigger button while my hammer's in the air. That will teleport you to wherever your hammer is, and then just smacking him. For this boss, you would usually, pull him back here. I'm not gonna do that for the sake of this. Plus, I'm gonna make a Abandoned Mines tanking video there, so you'll see the whole mechanics if you go watch that whenever that releases. But for now, a very common misconception is that aggro book does something. It does absolutely nothing. The only time aggro book is good is if you've lost aggro. All aggro book does is puts you at the top of the aggro list, but if you're already at the top, it does nothing. Yeah, so that's it. Don't pull aggro book on entry, don't pull it mid-fight, because there's been a lot of scenarios where I've seen tanks who do pull it mid-fight, lose aggro, and then be like, I don't have my aggro book, why did I lose aggro? I just pulled it. That's why. It does nothing if you're currently at the top. If you're not at the top, say a DPS just pulled, you're at second place on the aggro table. Once you're at second, you just have to be within aggro proximity of the boss when you pull the book. And when you pull the book, while you're moving, you'll see here, look, I'll pull it. That pulled where that yellow dot was, even though I still had the book in my hand back here. The boss won't detect it back here. The boss will detect it over here. So I'm going to go in now, and I'm going to show you what to do. So just pull right book, hammer throw, and then you start dumping. You do the whole dump, and yeah. You keep doing these uncharged hits, and immediately dumping as he gives you a hit. You dodge magic missile, and then he's going to keep hitting you like this. Pull your heal book as you get towards half health, and since you're immediately dumping these pips, oh, tank buster, when you shield tank buster, you want to be pulling your right book, charge, and then dump. That happened mid rotation, so I didn't really get to explain what I wanted to there. But yeah, basically, just keep hitting him as he's giving you pips. That's going to keep up your 50% damage decrease, or incoming damage decrease, and it's going to keep you alive longer and make it, your healer is going to thank you for doing that, because taking hits with more pips is going to really suck to heal through. So, other than that, you keep going, and hypothetically, I don't have my heal book, healer says they have nothing. You just do this. You just stun. Back and forth. Charge. Back and forth. I should dodge that. And what this is going to do is, as long as they have that swirly buff above their health, they can't touch you. They can still cast bars and everything, but they can't do melee hits, which is really sweet. Next up is Tank Buster, whenever they do it. So I'm just going to let my pips charge. There, Tank Buster. As you shield, grab your right book. Charge, and then dump. This is that aggro lock I was talking about. Oh, dodge. Where mid-fight, I gain upwards of 300k aggro just for shielding a tank buster, just by using up those pips in that order, following right book and dump. Where here, I'll pull him out of the poison. Magic missile. So next tank buster, you'll see. I'm getting towards half, so I'm gonna heal. Tank Buster, shield while right book goes off, and then dump 7 pips. This is like 300k, right? So the DPS, who would be standing back there, would have to do upwards of 300k in order to pull off me after that. And you're doing that multiple times a fight. You're doing that every Tank Buster, every time you have aggro book up and you have multiple sets of pips. It's great. That's how you are not going to lose aggro. By taking advantage of your right book mid-fight in combination with upwards of 5 or more pips. So like this, he gave me 3, charge, dump. That's like 300k right there. Not 300k, that's 300 more k. It's really hard to describe, but you will see a visible difference in how often you're getting pulled off of. So yeah, I'm not really doing the rotation. I should probably be doing that. So yeah, you're just constantly hitting the boss like this with uncharged hits. I should get out of those. I have the right armor on, right? Yeah. Alright, yeah, so just like that. And you're gonna see these tiles start proccing. As I'm hitting the boss and as he's giving me pips, tiles are gonna start going off. Granted, Scav Shaman isn't really the best boss to show off these tiles because of the, he does a lot of cast bar based attacks. But as long as you're frequently hitting him like this, on higher level shards, these tiles are gonna go nuts. Which also help in holding aggro, because, you know, tiles give you more damage. And I really don't want to do this. He's already at a quarter health. That's kind of depressing. Although that should just show you. Look how much damage I did. And now multiply that little chunk of health missing, by 4. And that's how much a DPS would have to do to pull off me by the end of a fight. Please let me go through the wall. Thank you. Jesus Christ, man. Alright, yeah, and that's the end of the video. I talked about, you know, just the basic stuff in the training room, and then I came here to show you the rotation in action. If I can figure it out, I'll put a picture of the tile sets up at the end of the video. If I can't, I don't know, link in the description, maybe, who knows. Now I gotta go edit this thing. I'm so not excited for that.
Try the bananas, darling. They're dashing.